and dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
Welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. Going to kind of just dive into some recent articles that have been posted that I've been reading. The first one I want to read here, it was posted at Truth and Media by Jeffrey Tucker. And this one is, Tucker, lower the drinking age. And this has been talked about a lot of times because you look at other countries that lower the drinking age. You tend to see maybe not as negative effects from the drinking law. But there's also been people that have argued that point, saying, well, you know, then you start seeing the even younger crowds start doing it, you know, black market type thing where the older kids will buy it for me. But you see that really in all cases. But let's get into the article here by Jeffrey Tucker. It's rush time for fraternities and sororities on college campuses right now. That means dressing up, networking, socializing, attending parties, and staying up late nights. It also means whether parents know it or like it or not. Astonishing amounts of drinking of very potent liquor. One of the most famous drinks is called Jungle Juice. Trash barrels filled with random spirits and mixtures consumed one red cup at a time. Many of these kids are away from home for the first time, able to drink to their heart's content. A huge culture has grown up around this practice, including a full vocabulary, games, and rituals. Mostly it's just fun, but it can also lead to serious trouble for everyone involved. Let's not be squeamish. It leads to very unadult-like amounts of personal abuse and often the abuse of others. Most of these kids have never been socialized in what it means to drink responsibly. They are living for the thrill that comes with defiance. The combination of new freedom, liquor, and sexual opportunity leads to potentially damaged lives. How do these kids get away with this? In fraternities and sororities, it all happens on private property, not public commercial spaces, and so campus police can look the other way. Most everyone does. Indeed, being able to drink with friends and unhampered by authority is a major appeal of the Greek system on campus. It's a way to get around the preposterously high drinking age. Getting around this law will consume a major part of the energy and creativity of these kids for the next 3 years. As for everyone else who cannot afford to join, it's all about the life of sneaking around, getting to know older friends, lying and hiding, pre-gaming before parties just in case there is no liquor there, and generally adopting a life of binging and purging, blackouts and hangovers, rising and repeating, and so on. It goes for years until finally the dawn of what the state considers adulthood. For an entire class of people, it's the roaring 20s all over again. It's all part of Prohibition's legacy and a reflection of this country's strange attitudes towards drinking in general. The drinking age in the United States, 21, adopted in 1984, is one of the highest in the world. Countries that compare in severity are only a few, including Indonesia, Kazakhstan, Cameroon, Oman, Pakistan, Qatar, Sri Lanka, and Tajikistan. I don't even know how to pronounce that. Most of the rest of the world has settled on 18 for liquor and 16 for beer and wine. In practice, most European countries have very low enforcement of even that. Somehow it works just fine for them. The consequences of this draconian law have been terrible for American society. Teenage drinking is a gigantic part of American life, all done surreptitiously and mostly without responsible oversight. The market for fake IDs is ubiquitous and diffused. Everyone in the United States has a story of kids and of their abusive habits. They're strategizing, their hidden flask and risky games, their constant maneuvering to do what they know they were not supposed to do. The drinking age law would surely be a winner in a competition for the least obeyed law. The notion that this law is accomplished anything to actually stop or even curb teen drinking is preposterous. Instead, we all see the unintended effects of prohibition: overindulgence, antisocial behavior, disrespect for the law, secrecy and sneaking, and a massive diversion of human energy. People speak of rape crisis on campus, and whatever the scope of the problem, the fact that women under 21 must retreat to dorm rooms and frat houses to drink puts them all in a vulnerable situation. It's hard to imagine that consent is really there when people are falling down, passing out, and feeling mortified the next day about what happened. In fact, the law represents a true danger to women in particular because it prohibits legal access to safe public places to drink responsibly and go home to a safe environment afterwards. There is an organization of college administrators who are fed up. It is called the Amethyst Initiative. Currently, 135 colleagues have signed support for a lower drinking age. Their goal is not to encourage more drinking, but to recognize the reality of the current law and how it has led to perverse consequences on campus. You know, the situation has to be extremely serious to get the risk-adverse crowd on board. Their statement reads, "A culture of dangerous, clandestine binge drinking, often conducted off campus, has developed. Alcohol education that mandates abstinence as the only legal option has not resulted in significant constructive behavioral change among our students. Adults under 21 are deemed capable of voting, signing contracts, serving in juries, and enlisting in the military but are told they are not mature enough to have a beer. By choosing to use fake IDs, students have ethical compromises that erode respect for the law. It's not just about campus, it's about teens and drinking in general. The law requires them to hide in private places. Such clandestine meetings can lead to compromising and dangerous situations without reliable public oversight. It's also about business. Convenience stores and bars in particular have been put in a strange position. They have been enlisted to become the enforcement arm of an unenforceable policy, which has meant haggling customers, inventing new systems for ferreting out violators, turning the servers into cops, confiscating IDs, and creating an environment of snooping and threats in a place that should be about service and fun. Why isn't something done to change this? Those who are most affected have the least political power. By the time they figure out the ropes in American political life, they are turning 21 and so no longer have to deal with the problem. In practice, this means that there is no real um, constituency pushing them for reform of these laws. That's why they have persisted for 30 years without serious pressure to change, despite the obvious failure they have been. There is some movement at the state level. In Missouri, longtime state Representative Phyllis Kahn has worked for a lowering of the drinking age in her state. She has an interesting take on whether this would mean that the state would have to give up the 10% of federal highway funds, the threat that feds used to force states to raise their drinking ages. In 2012, a Supreme Court ruling on Medicaid clearly stated that federal government could not coerce states by withdrawing funding to force legislative action at the state level. Other activists have said that even if the federal highway funding is cut, the increase in revenue from alcohol sales and decline in enforcement costs could make up a lot of the difference. Regardless of the financing issues, current drinking age law is unenforceable and destructive. The reality is that kids are going to drink. Denying that and imposing ever more draconian punishments doesn't fix the real problems with alcohol. What we need is a normal environment of parental and community supervision so that such drinking can occur in a responsible way. Yes, kids will probably drink more often, and yes, more kids will probably try alcohol, but they can do so in an environment that is safety and responsibility. Bringing it into light rather than driving it underground is the best way to solve binging and abuse. Doubling down on a bad rule rooted in the idea that laws can change human desire is not a workable solution. The choice between virtue and vice is a human choice. Relying on the government to make this choice for us disables the social order's internal mechanisms for bringing about and rewarding responsible behavior. It seems like a paradox, but it is true. The only path toward restoring sanity in teenage drinking is greater liberty. And this really touches on, how the laws don't affect criminals, and or bad behavior. And a lot of times it actually encourages it by making a black market and making it more profitable. Um, and in teen and drinking, the ones that get away with it when they're teens, they get away with it in small amounts and maybe get drunk a few times, have a few parties. Um, then you have the college level where everybody's kind of unleashed and it just becomes a binge drinking orgy basically. And a lot of it does get extremely out of hand. And I know when I was in high school, I knew of kids that their parents let them drink around them. And I would say most of them never became alcoholics. never binge drink. They might have a few beers, at a cookout. Maybe have a beer at home, but never slam an alcohol. There might have been one or two that they took it to an extreme. And I think a lot of that also goes to where they went to college and what circumstances they were in, where they were just partying it up with the rest of the people that have finally been unhinged from any supervision while they drink. But, this also, it doesn't touch on another thing, that it's kind of like the war on drugs, and any way that they can profit off of people, they do, and it's usually through laws that they know are really do not help a issue. But you got to remember, we have for-profit prisons out there, and there's a lot of nonviolent, victimless crimes out there that you wonder why. Well, one, it allows them to show power over you. You either become subordinate to us, or you are going to be enslaved. And a lot of times it might be for doing nothing than choosing what you want to put in your body. People get in trouble for raw milk. You can even, stop talking about maybe marijuana or any of the other drug war. But raw milk, trying to purchase raw milk. There's places that, allow you to buy into a dairy farm. Basically, you become a small owner of, the herd. Therefore, you're allowed to get raw milk from that herd. But there's other places where it's really restricted. And people have gotten in trouble. And, there's also been circumstances where sheriffs have stepped up and said, no, you're not going to harass these people for their raw milk. And I have a clip here. This is from Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Go subscribe. But this is Bastiat's The Law, The Moral Case for Liberty. And I have the book right here. But you really, if you haven't ever read the book, The Law, you must check it out. It's, this is a French writer. It really touches on the basis of law and government and society, and it is a moral case for liberty. But I want to play this Ron Paul Liberty Report.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Daniel McAdams is with me today. Daniel, nice to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Daniel, I'd like to talk today a little bit about a favorite book of mine. There's been many books that have influenced me, and I don't have one that is the most important one. But this is the book that came to my mind when I was asked on national TV, what book is a good book to influence people with the libertarian ideas? And the first thought came to my mind was the book called The Law. And that was written by Frederick Bastiat in 1870. So this is the booklet. Here it is. It's not very big, 75 pages. And it's fantastic, and we want to talk about that a little bit. But I want to contrast that with another book that had a lot of influence, but not one that is going to be read by everybody who's especially just getting interested in free market economics and libertarianism. And this is Human Action by Mises. I mean, look at the size of this thing. It took me even a couple days to read it. But it took me, actually, it probably took me a couple of years, but I did get through it. But there's a lot of material in there. So this isn't where people start, but it's always there for research, and it's going to be around for hundreds of years, even though they mistreated Mises the whole time he came to America after he escaped from the Nazis, in the 1940s. Anyway, The Law is a neat little book, and it was written by Bastiat, who unfortunately died at the age of 49. Had tuberculosis. He was French, but his life is interesting too. He became an orphan at an early age and lived with family. But later on, he actually inherited a lot of money. He could be independent and got interested in economics. And actually, 2 years before he died, he was in the French Assembly. But he did unbelievably good work in this short period of time. And the best known book is The Law. And for me, it's important because it deals with a basic moral principle. And very simply, there's other things we want to mention, but the thing that I remember is he summarizes this by saying, government should never be permitted to do anything that you and I can't do, which means you and I can't steal, we can't counterfeit money, we can't do this. Yet governments do this all the time, and he was very, very clear on this. The purpose of government was to protect person, liberty, and property. Very, very narrow. So he was obviously very much of a, believe in natural law. But I am sure you came across some of his writings. I know you read Henry Hazlitt, and he introduces a lot of people to Bastiat and the law.
And I was, a bit of a late comer, I have to say. It really wasn't until I started working for you that I started looking at some of the philosophy. And I did start by reading Hazlitt, which is such a wonderful book. It's such easy reading. I like what you said earlier. You don't have to take a huge meal. You can take a little, hors d'oeuvre. But reading Hazlitt was when I first came across the broken window fallacy that Bastiat had put forth, and that was fascinating to me.
Yeah, and it makes. Broken window being fixed, but you never talk about, well, what would have happened to the money? And he suggests maybe somebody would have had a nice suit or something like that. So it's opportunity cost. Matter of fact, they didn't use that term back then, but Henry Hazlitt did. And the Austrian economists use that frequently now of opportunity cost. So if you're misdirected by regulations or inflation or all of these things, there could be much better expenditures, and that's why central economic planning is not a good idea. But very simply, as you know, since you've read this story on the broken window, the story is that he goes through this. Somebody breaks the window, and he goes through and tries to explain all the benefits from this. And it doesn't turn out, that there are any real benefits other than the fact you get back to normal. Like, don't you think we could apply that to building a bomb?
Exactly. It does employ people, but it actually you hardly get back to normal, because when it's used, you have additional expenses. So you have the expenses building it and cleaning up after, which is what the U.S. often does. We pay to bomb them, then we pay to clean it up.
And then we end up with more enemies.
Yeah.
So, yes, the bombing is much worse than a broken window. And then, the peace dividend, that was the greatest disappointment I think that so many of us had, was there was no peace benefit dividend when the Soviet system collapsed. But what was so good about what Bastiat did was he told it in stories. Parables evidently is a good tool, and making a little fun is a good way to do it too. And he has a book, it's called Sophisms, Bastiat's Sophisms, and these are sort of parables. But one that I thought was rather interesting is that he says, government's there to make jobs. That's what we want the Republicans and Democrats. How are you going to create jobs? I'm going to create more jobs than anybody else. So he comes up with the theoretical suggestion. Well, the candle makers have a petition. And they say what we need to do in order to hire more people and make more money is that we need to block out the sun. So that's so ridiculous, but it makes the point. Yeah, block out the sun. You're not allowed to have shades on your windows. More candles will be sold. Employment rates will go up. But will people be more prosperous and happy? Obviously not. It's a joke. But there was another one about the right hand. Did you come across that story ever?
That's a great one. You cut off, increase the labor force. You're not allowed to. You're not allowed to use your right hand. You have to cut it off.
No, they weren't into cutting off hands. But they just said that if everybody was compelled, prohibited from using their right hand, he was assuming everybody was right-handed. But if you just use your dominant hand, they're not allowed to use your dominant hand, everything would slow up. It would take longer to build a building. So everybody would be employed and they wouldn't have to worry about it. So those kind of things, are so silly, but it calls attention to it. But once again, I think the really important thing was arguing the case about governments not being able to do anything. But governments break laws all the time. Don't you think our FBI and a few other government agents are breaking laws all the time?
That's what they do. That's what they do for a living.
They're supposed to protect us,
What struck me about Bastiat, he talked about the natural state of man, and man naturally has his life and his property before the law. These are not created by laws. They exist before law, and law exists to protect those. If you think about it philosophically, it's such a powerful thought.
Yeah, and that would obviously put him into the whole idea of where rights come from. They don't come from our Bill of Rights or from our government, and that's why I've always, through this type of influence and common sense, and I would have been on the side that listing rights individually, there was an argument against that. The Anti-Federalists were arguing against listing them because you wouldn't list enough. You might miss one, and therefore, they were excluded. So it's the basic principle of life, liberty, and property, and government shouldn't be there. They're there to protect it. And now we have categories. How many times have I complained about group rights? You don't have a right because you belong to a group. You neither should be entitled to anything because you belong to a specific lobbying group, nor should you ever be punished. And over the years, we have punished groups, whether it has been the blacks in slavery and Jim Crow laws, but also the Japanese. That was a group of people that were punished. So this is why rights have to be individual. And this is why we could have solved the problems of marriage and everything else. Everybody has an individual right to their life and liberty, but they can't do anything. They cannot use force, nor should the government be able to use force.
Yes.
But I want to thank everybody for tuning in and suggest that if you have not, I'm sure a lot of you have already read the book, The Law. And if you have, think about passing it out and spreading it around. 75 pages. It's interesting that the Fee Foundation published this book in 1950. It was 100 years after Bastiat died. And it's still circulating, but it's easy to get. You can read this off the internet, and there are no restraints on publishing this. This is a very important little booklet, especially to get people introduced to the basic moral principle. And I think this is one of the reasons a lot of young people are attracted to the philosophy of libertarianism. It's based on a moral principle of nonviolence, and why people followed Gandhi and why people followed Martin Luther King. They had a moral principle that they were defending. And there's a very important basic moral principle here to deal with social behavior as well as behavior in the economic and marketplace as well as in foreign policy. But I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and please come back to the Liberty Report soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to
second here. Okay. Now, sorry, having a little bit of an issue here. Okay. Now, when we look at government, what government is to us now, we have to look at it as a monopoly on force. And they are the ones that are able to get away with theft, whether it be taxation, which we understand taxation to be theft. You're not voluntarily giving up that money. You have the threat of force being brought upon you for not paying that tax. So it's, again, a monopoly on force where they have the right to attack you for not paying them for things that you may not agree with. If any other group of people did that, they would be put in prison. But you can get away with it if you are government. And government goes against natural law to contain its power, to prevent loss of that power. And it'll forever grow because, when they start seeking ultimate power, that ultimate power ultimately corrupts again. It's something that really has brought down society in some form or fashion in every type of empire that's ever been created. And these people do not have your best interests. And give me a second again. I'm not going to read this one article here, but because it's extremely long, but I want people to check it out. NSA whistleblower William Binney says agency's methods make us less safe. And it says, I'm going to read just a little paragraph here. It says, in a very powerful exclusive interview, I recently had the privilege of speaking to an American hero, William Binney, NSA whistleblower. We discussed how NSA mass data collection makes us less safe, how the intentions behind it are not misguided but positively nefarious, how the lies have been told about it are snowballing, and how Rand Paul presidential candidacy may uniquely represent an opportunity for change. And they do have the audio and the transcript right there on Truth and Media. And while I'm at Truth and Media, United We Stand Festival. You may remember that from freeandequal.org. Free and Equal hosted the last third-party debates alongside, I can think of his name off the top of my head right now, Larry King. And they are having another United We Stand. And Eric Rose put up an article on Truth and Media. United We Stand Music Activism Festival returns to LA for second year. This September, the Free and Equal Elections Foundation United We Stand Festival returns to Los Angeles to to present a wide range of socially conscious musicians, speakers, authors, and other cultural leaders to discuss and celebrate the political process. Originally launched in May 2014, the second annual United We Stand Festival will take place at the Belasco Theater in Los Angeles on September 19th from 5 to 10 p.m. Pacific. The 2014 event was seen as a success, bringing together musicians, Moral Technique, Capadonna, and You Got of Wu-Tang Clan, comedian Lee Camp, activist Sean Stone, Jill Stein, Foster Gamble, Thrive, Nick Burnaby, March Against Monsanto, Richard Gage, Architects for Engineer and 9/11 Truth, journalists Abby Martin, Ben Swan, Amber Lyon, Meta Al-Hassan, Luke Radowski, Nar Muhawish, and many more. The 2015 event will kick off a series of open presidential debates for 2016 presented by the Free and Equal Foundation, Free and Equal Elections Foundation. The festival will be broadcast worldwide by freeandequal.org. Free and Equal hopes that the event's momentum will help inspire people to run for office, targeting the congressional races in 2016. Free and Equal Elections will also launch an open source election assistant database. The election assistant database will be accessible to all and provide information on every candidate. The organization aims to bring together a range of speakers on topics including fighting against the Patriot Act, NDAA, NSA, endless warfare, the war on drugs, pollution, election fraud, drones, GMOs, police brutality, and attack on net neutrality. By creating an event that combines the most socially conscious elements of activism, music, and journalism, we're allowing concerned citizens to be a part of a much-needed conversation about the failures of a political process and, most importantly, possible solutions. Free and Equal founder Christina Tobin tells Truth and Media. Tobin says that she hopes the event can contribute to the broad awakening taking place around the United States. The United We Stand Festival 2015 will feature civil rights leader Amelia Boynton Robinson as the keynote speaker, as well as Professor Griff from Public Enemy, conscious reggae artist Spraga Benz, journalist Amber Lyon, Luke Radowski, and Manar Muhawish, Mint Press News, radio host Tony Stiles, Alexander McCoven, co-founder and president of Students for Liberty, author Daniel Pinchak, former judge and vice presidential candidate Jim Gray, and a host of other musicians, artists, activists, and thinkers from around the country. And you can go find that at freeandequal.org. Just find the United We Stand Festival tab. Now, one thing that you hear a lot of talk about right now is the dollar's going up in price, but the gold's dropping, and you shouldn't have gold. Well, I think gold dropping is an opportunity to buy, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that are out there. And when you look at the key aspects of it, you kind of see that maybe this is being manipulated a little bit. Maybe just a little bit. And I have one here. It was posted on InfoWars, massive paper gold manipulation. and I just want to play. Actually, I'm not even gonna play it, but I want people to go check it out. Massive paper gold manipulation. But basically, $2.7 billion in paper gold was dumped on the market. And what this means is we have an illusion going. And a lot of people are going to maybe not be buying up too much gold, not seeing, oh, our dollar is going to go up. Oh, yay. Well, I guarantee you there's going to be people that will be buying up gold. And when you find out, which I've kind of been looking into it, and it's already on a move the other way. Paper gold was dumped on the market, but people are buying up physical gold. And the slump's going back the other way, and I think, it's, again, a staving off of a complete collapse. And it seems like they're having to do this a lot. High manipulation of the market. And I think the high manipulation of the market is because they are trying to keep the dollar up for a long enough period that they can justify raising interest rates. But that in itself will burst the bubble. And I've talked about this before, and it's just not going to be good. I just don't see good coming out of this. Okay, I got one from AMTV here. And this one is General Wesley Clark warns Americans of concentration camps. So, give me. Okay, here we
go. Generally, a lot of people would say you reap what you sow. So how do we fix self-radicalized lone wolves domestically?
Well, we've got to identify the people who are most likely to be radicalized. We've got to cut this off at the beginning. There are always a certain number of young people who are alienated. They don't get a job, they lost a girlfriend, their family doesn't feel happy here. And we can watch the signs of that, and there are members of the community who will reach out to those people and bring them back in and encourage them to look at their blessings here. But I do think on a national policy level, we need to look at what self-radicalization means, because we are at war with this group of terrorists. They do have an ideology. In World War II, if someone supported Nazi Germany at the expense of the United States, we didn't say that was freedom of speech. We put him in a camp. They were prisoners of war. So if these people are radicalized and they don't support the United States and they're disloyal to the United States as a matter of principle, fine, that's their right. It's our right and our obligation to segregate them from the normal community for the duration of the conflict. And I think we're going to have to increasingly get tough on this, not only in the United States, but our allied nations like Britain and Germany and France are going to have to look at their domestic law procedures.
General Wesley Clark, as always, great to see you, sir. Thanks for your time, and I want to pass along to our viewers.
Protect your guns with the Safe and Vault store. That's the Safe and Vault store. Click link below right now. A price match guarantee on all of its popular safes. Give them a call today. Free shipping. Enter promo code Second Amendment 2 in the amendment for 10% off your order through the end of the month, into July, and also free shipping. Click the link below right now. That's a Safe and Vault store. Hey, everybody. I'm Christopher Green, and you're tuning into AMTV, Alternative Media Television. It's July 21st, 2015. General Wesley Clark, a 4-star general, has all kinds of medals, even medals I haven't even heard of, honorary medals. I've never heard of from around the world, made a very outlandish, extreme, controversial, and insane comment yesterday. I believe it was on MSNBC. Many of you are probably familiar with him. He was very critical of the Bush administration post the September 11th, 2001 terror attacks, of which he accused the Bush administration of going to war in countless country after country, whether or not it was Iraq or Afghanistan overseas, post 9/11, even though the countries, the respective countries like Iraq, had nothing to do with the alleged attacks. Now, yesterday on MSNBC, I believe it was, made a comment warning Americans that if they disagreed with the government, they should be put in internment camps. These are some of the most controversial, extreme, anti-American comments I have ever heard in the history of being in this business, in the history of being alive, in the history of AMTV. General Wesley Clark, a 4-star, highly respected general, said that if you disagree with the government, you should be put in a concentration camp, maybe even potentially killed. He says that during times of war, like during World War II, for example, if you were anti the United States during World War II in support of the Nazis, he uses that as an example. You had no rights. You were just put into a concentration camp, an internment camp, a FEMA camp. Remember, we did this to the Japanese Americans around this time because they had slanted eyes. How does the politically correct narrative and the politically correct community that makes up America today feel about that? And feel about what General Wesley Clark is saying to countless Americans, millions and millions of people. More importantly, why is he saying it? Again, these are some of the most anti-American, scandalous, controversial, and insane comments I have ever heard in the history of the world. I mean, he's telegraphing, it's no longer a conspiracy, he's telegraphing concentration camps for Americans, political dissidents. Now, of course, he's using it under the guise of ISIS, you know, with all these ISIS attacks, these attacks by ISIL, the new government CIA-created boogeyman. We used to have Al-Qaeda, but allegedly Osama bin Laden, who was killed multiple times, and then his body thrown off a U.S. warship without a selfie being taken or any DNA evidence to prove it. Again, he died many times over. Now the new boogeyman is ISIS, and it's the smokescreen for the reason we're fighting all of these wars overseas. The same wars that General Wesley Clark had criticized on Democracy Now! Very famously post the 9/11 September 2001 terror attacks, and criticized heavily the Bush administration for invading these countries under false pretenses, bold-faced lies. Now no longer a conspiracy, but a 4-star general warning countless Americans and those of you tuning in around the world that if you disagree with the federal government, if you disagree with Barack Obama, if you disagree with his radical policies, they'll just declare an act of war and put you in a concentration camp and maybe even put you to death. Again, these aren't my words. These are the words of a 4-star general who I'm paraphrasing a little bit. But this is what he said yesterday. Why is the general making these comments? Well, I think it's probably more than likely a trial balloon. What is a trial balloon, Christopher? Well, basically, he's putting it into the public consciousness. They're testing it. They're testing the waters. They're creating a narrative around it. They want to hear public discourse and discussion. See the dumb ass sheeple groundlings. See how they deal with the fact that they're kind of telegraphing you in the not too distant future. Under the declaration of war, they're going to start gathering up countless Americans and throwing you in freaking concentration camps. You know, if you're anti-Obama, and let's say you vote for Trump, who Senator McCain here in Arizona, it's amazing that he gets elected because there's countless Arizonans here locally that just hate this guy. I mean, I've been to the town hall meetings interviewing him. It seems like people just hate the guy. He says that Trump is igniting the crazies. So maybe people like General Wesley Clark and the people that he worked for will decide that anybody that votes for Trump or that supports Trump should be put in a concentration camp, a FEMA camp. And maybe they'll even put you to death for disagreeing with Hillary Rodham Clinton in 2016. So, you know, who knows? Maybe General Wesley Clark owes certain people something, which is why he's putting out this trial balloon, putting this into public consciousness, creating public discourse around this to see and to kind of gauge the reaction from the people. gauge the reaction from the mainstream corporatist media that, again, is pushing and propelling this message. See what people do. See if they're comfortable with it. You know, in this politically correct transgender society, a 4-star freaking general talking about putting Americans in concentration camps. You know, it's absolutely insane. You know, I think what General Wesley Clark said yesterday was probably the most radical statement I've ever heard. And even though I entirely detest it and disagree with it and think he's a piece of shit for saying it, I still don't think General Wesley Clark should go to a concentration camp. That's totally and entirely and utterly anti-American. The whole idea and principle of America is that we're allowed to be political dissidents. The country was founded on political dissidents. Who do you think our founding fathers were? Radical political dissidents. That's what established America. That's what established this great country. So again, this is a trial.
And quote from Thomas Jefferson, when the people fear the government, there is tyranny. When the government fears the people, there is liberty. I'm going to stop that there. Now, when we look at really where America has gone in the past 10, 15 years, we really see a decay in society. Seems to be a lot more division, a lot more infighting. You know, the stuff that we see the infighting about are things that we're not going to really be able to change people's attitudes in the way we're doing it. This isn't us protesting slavery or civil rights. This is basically protesting for more exposure, not really going after actual problems. And it's really a giant reality show. And that's how propaganda is driven. It becomes a giant reality show. Now that we have reality shows, you start seeing how the media is nothing but a reality show. Not just the reality shows themselves, but our news. Our news is such a reality show. It's not actual reality. When they started defining these programs that aren't reality as reality shows, and we allowed them to define that as reality, when they tell us that the news is reality, you're really getting the same thing. You want to see the reality of what we're dealing with. I have one here, Infowars.com. Family threatened with government fine for parking cars in their own driveway. Agenda 21 style ordinance restricts homeowners to 2 cars in the name of conservation. Government officials in Cobb County, Georgia, are threatening a family with a fine for parking too many cars in their own driveway. The Oviedo family were hit with the violation notice after local bureaucrats acted on an anonymous complaint that there were 4 cars parked on the property. Local ordinance rules, which were recently changed, mandate that a maximum of 2 cars be parked at any one time. The family has relatives visiting, and their 2 kids are home from college, but this explanation was enough to prevent them getting a visit from code enforcement officials last week. I am angry. I am beyond angry. I don't see how the government can tell me whose cars I can park in my own driveway, Kim Oviedo told WSB TV2. I'm going to play a clip here real quick. It's only 2 minutes.
My daughter told me my eyes was gold. Rushed down the grade.
Give me a second to get this commercial off here.
Emailed Channel 2 Action News after Cobb County threatened to impose some large fines over their college children being home for the summer. Consumer investigator Jim Strickland live, and you say it's not about the children, it's about their cars, Jim.
Yeah, Justin, the proof is here in the driveway. These homes have zoning that stresses conservation. Well, 5 years ago, after the family moved in, they changed the rules about cars. Of course, the family didn't know that until they received this notice of violation.
This is my son.
This is your son. Kim Oviedo walked me through the issue. Too big a family with too many cars.
I'm angry. I am beyond angry. I don't see how the government can tell me whose car I can park in my own driveway.
Oviedo got a visit Friday from code enforcement, acting on an anonymous complaint. This neighborhood is zoned an open space community. Documents show after she got here, they instituted a limit to 2 cars parked outside.
The fact that my kid's home from college, and now I'm a lawbreaker, I guess.
Neighbor Mark Talley has 3 cars for the summer, too.
I love Cobb County. I love living here, and generally speaking, I'm a fan of what we do, but it seems to just not make a whole lot of sense.
They can file this application for $150 for a special permit. It requires a current boundary survey.
And the surveys, I was told, run anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000.
Did the county tell you that?
Yes. I'm having to pay to park on a property that I already pay tax on.
A county spokesperson said she was researching how Oviedo and Talley could get around having to pay fines or permit fees. The families doubt they're alone.
There's probably 25 in our neighborhood, I would guess, that at any time are violating that law.
While we were editing that story, the county called back. Turns out if the family files an affidavit saying who owns the cars, they're going to let it slide this summer. But next summer, with 4 kids with cars, they're going to have to apply for that permit. Reporting live, Cobb County, Kennesaw, Jim Strickland, Channel 2 Action News.
So there you go. Government saying not only do you have to rent your property by paying a tax, we're also going to tell you how many cars, and the government will continue to overreach. And that's why you have to fight any type of enforcement on private property. Code enforcement is the worst thing you can vote for. Even if you think your neighbor is a slob and you know what not, once you get the code enforcement up, guess what? You're paying higher property taxes. It always happens. Then it becomes a point where you're like, I gotta pay this much for property. Yeah, because you keep asking them to enforce codes on people's private property that they already pay a tax for. Now they're paying a higher tax to have someone come basically meddle in their affairs. And, why this is getting news coverage? Well, what you can't see, because this is radio, was that this was a affluent type neighborhood, more upper middle class neighborhood. Therefore, all of a sudden the rich are now, what they media likes to portray as rich people when they don't, go into the billionaires. Those are a different even class people than rich people. It's funny how they call upper middle class rich now. When you got billionaires sitting here manipulating governments and free speech. But anyways, once it starts affecting these people, they're like, oh, whoa, we didn't want this to affect us. Well, see, the problem with picking on the poor people that might not be able to have the nice cars in their driveways and You want the neighborhood cleaned up. Guess what? Eventually it's going to affect you. Because then you're going to get a group of, people looking at you because you have multiple cars. It's, look at him having multiple cars. He pollutes, and it doesn't. It looks tacky that he has more than 2 vehicles in his driveway. We should make a rule about that. That's exactly what happened. In my experience, when I lived in the city for a long enough period, I've seen the problems, and even with like trash cans. People leave their trash can out for more than that trash day, even if trash day is on Friday and they're gone for the weekend. They left Friday, left their trash can out. They might get fined for that. Dumb bureaucracy because someone goes, he left his trash can out too long. So we're going to make a rule for that. This eventually affects everyone. Then it becomes preposterous. But a lot of times, these people champion for these types of rules, not thinking it would affect them. Okay. Breaking from, well, not really breaking, but from Zero Hedge, IRS deleted backups of 24,000 Lois Lerner emails months after subpoena. The tapes were erased in March 2014, months after congressional investigators requested all of Lerner's emails. Back in 2013, when IRS scandalous targeting of Tea Party organizations was first disclosed, and when the IRS official Lois Lerner pleaded the fifth, while the IRS defense was that all her emails in the period under question were destroyed due to a local hard disk failure, which was then shredded to destroy all evidence. Everyone who was not an utter idiot asked a simple question: where are the backup servers? After all, every email not only leaves a permanent trail, it can always be tracked down to a host server. Today, during a testimony by the Treasurer's Inspector General for Tax Administration, J. Russell George, before Jason Sheffes, Chairman of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, the IRS finally closed that gaping loophole in the most idiotic way possible. As AP reports, according to the IG's Deputy Timothy Camus, 2 lower-graded employees at the IRS Center in Martinsburg, West Virginia, erased 422 computer backup tapes that contain as many as 24,000 emails to and from former IRS official Lois Lerner. It gets better. The tapes were erased in March 2014, months after congressional investigators requested all of Lerner's emails, and months after Zero Hedge, among others, said to simply track down the server backups. And the punchline, according to George, who before investigating IRS crimes was a page for the 1980 Democratic National Convention and a founder of the Howard University College Democrats, the workers might be incompetent, a lead investigator said Thursday, but there's no evidence they were part of a criminal conspiracy to destroy evidence. Funny, remember the conversation the guy who was overseeing the Dutch Bank library riggers had with a member of the Rither Bankers Association shortly before all hell broke loose? Mr. Nicholas repeatedly dismissed concerns that LIBOR could be manipulated. Banks do not collude to try to set a LIBOR rating, he told John Ewan, the BBA official in charge of running LIBOR. I I think I am just hearing a lot of hysteria about LIBOR. That is just misinformation, Mr. Nicholas added. When the Dutch bank official argued that an individual bank wouldn't be able to improperly influence LIBOR, which at the time was set by a group of 16 banks, Mr. Ewan responded, a cabal of them could. What's a cabal, Mr. Nicholas asked. A group together could, Mr. Ewan said. That's an interesting conspiracy theory, Mr. Nicholas responded. It was interesting. It was also a fact, and it was playing out right under Nicholas's nose for years, all the while while he had not the faintest idea. Same thing with the IRS, only such much worse. The guy who just informed a committee that the IRS employees purposely deleted 422 computer backup tapes containing tens of thousands of Lois Lerner emails said they did not. They did so by accident because it would be a conspiracy theory to suggest they could have possibly done so maliciously and hence criminally, nor the fact that they had clear congressional orders to preserve all emails relating to Lois Lerner. In a statement, the IRS said it repeatedly alerted employees starting in May 2013 that they must save all emails, computer tapes, and other records related to investigations by Congress and Justice Department. The IRS recognizes there was a clear breakdown of communication in one part of the organization regarding the need to preserve and retain backup tapes and information, although the Inspector General concluded this wasn't intentional, the statement said. And it goes on. But, yeah, most people are not, I don't think, going to believe that. Okay. Moving on here. Couple different ones, clips I was going to play, but we're already halfway through the broadcast, so I'm trying to dissect which ones I do want to get to. Okay. This one I do want to get to, and this kind of gets into technology, you know. One thing I talk about is Bitcoin, but the other thing is encryption. And, you know, I'm not an expert on encryption, but I have talked to people that I know that are really into that type of stuff, and it's something that governments don't like. Let's put it that way. And they're forever trying to break a lot of encryptions and manipulate things, and they're finding a lot of difficulty in that. But I want to play this from Reason, and this one's titled "Encryption Protects Free Speech." Ladar Vision. On online freedom, net neutrality, and cryptography.
We've watched encryption grow more dominant and
now
more dominant.
Now we have a situation where the major corporations are not cooperating. Suppose that we had legislation which required two keys.
Where this is headed is towards proposals for some kind of stockpile of encryption keys.
If we're going to continue to preserve our right to free speech in the electronic age, then we need to use tools like encryption. It just makes sense.
Hi, I'm Zach Weissmuller for Reason TV, here with Ladar Levison. He is the founder of LavaBit, the email service famously used by Edward Snowden, and which he shut down in 2013 after the government requested all the encryption keys to access all the email on his server. We spoke about that about a year ago. At that time, you said that you hoped that the revelations would kind of create a market. Do we have more encryption than we did before? Has a market and a desire for that arisen?
Oh, I think it certainly has. I think my biggest problem I have with what's happened in the last year is that security and encryption have become marketing terms. And unfortunately, we're seeing this huge growth in the number of encrypted communication services and encrypted internet services in general. But when you dig into the details, they're not truly secure.
How do you drill down and figure out, what is real and how does the layperson know what is a good encrypted product versus a bad one?
You mean without getting a PhD in computer engineering?
Yes, preferably.
It's really difficult. And, I consider myself to be, I guess I'm going to use the E word, an expert. And, I can't evaluate every product and service that I use, every application that I download off the Play Store. I really have to rely on reputation in a lot of instances.
One of your current endeavors is something called the Dark Mail Alliance, which you're working on with a team of other high-profile people in the encryption movement. One of them is Phil Zimmerman, who created PGP, which is one of the first widely adopted methods of encryption. What are you hoping to accomplish with the Dark Mail Alliance?
To create a set of protocols that will allow people to build email clients that look and function identically to the way they do today, but under the covers are capable of encrypting that message before it leaves your computer in such a way that only the intended recipient can decrypt it when it reaches the other end. The tricky part, the part we're actually spending a lot of time on right now, refining, is how do we build a client that does that encryption for you, is completely innocuous and user-friendly to the novice, but still allows the expert like me to easily go in and verify that the encryption is happening properly and that nothing is going wrong.
So when we look at what happened to you and LavaBit, feds came in and basically asked for the keys to the vault to be able to look at everyone's email. Are you looking to solve that problem then?
My system was the best I could do 10 years ago without changing the protocols themselves. I took that like I would take the laws of physics as an immutable constant that I had to work around. So the system I built was focused on protecting the messages while they were in my control, which is why they were in the control of my servers. So my system didn't do anything to protect a message before it arrived at LavaBit or after it left. I relied on an internet standard known as Transport Layer Security, or TLS, to create a wrapper, an encrypted wrapper around the connection between my server and my users' desktops. And it was that wrapper that the FBI wanted to peel back. So what I want to do is push the encryption out of the server and onto the user's devices themselves.
Right.
So that way, the sender would encrypt the message before it even arrived at my server, and it wouldn't be decrypted until it actually arrived at the user's desktop.
This is an issue that was raised very recently in a congressional hearing.
We cannot break strong encryption.
The director of the FBI actually was telling companies we need to have a kind of backdoor around the encryption to fight cyber terrorism.
Well, what Mr. Comey overlooked was that this universal use of encryption has become a requirement as a result of the irresponsible use of surveillance tools by his own organization. If we want to be able to have private conversations, which I feel is fundamentally necessary to a free and fair democracy in order for it to operate, if we're going to continue to preserve our right to free speech in the electronic age, then we need to use tools like encryption. It just makes sense.
Why is privacy important to democracy and free speech, in your opinion? Because the rebuttal that you always hear is, if you have nothing to hide, why do you need to build these brick walls around your conversations?
Because how do I get exposed to ideas, to people whose opinions differ from me, if I'm constantly in fear of that association coming back to haunt my business prospects? People who attended a Communist Party meeting once in college because they were curious, all of a sudden were blacklisted and could no longer work in Hollywood.
Are you afraid that the bad guys, the terrorists, will use this technology to endanger America? And if that happens, are you afraid there's going to be a huge government pushback against encryption technology?
I'm not afraid of the pushback. I am afraid that terrorists will use this technology, certainly. I don't want to see anybody blown up any more than the next person, which is why I'm upset that I have to build a mil-spec crypto communication system for the entire planet just to say I love you to a spouse.
Another internet freedom issue that gets a lot of attention, especially from online activists, is net neutrality. You've said that you think going through the FCC is misguided. Why?
The problem is that we view the internet and access to it as a utility. It shouldn't be viewed as a utility. It should be viewed as a commodity. I want to move us to a system closer to what they have in the United Kingdom, where there's a neutral body that maintains the line between the central office and the end user's home, and that any service provider who can run fiber to that central office can offer internet access at whatever speed and price they think is appropriate. And it's why for the equivalent of $20, you can get a 100 megabit connection in the United Kingdom. Whereas over here, you have to pay upwards of $100.
And you think that's because we treat it as a utility?
It's because there's no competition.
Oh, okay.
And that's the real issue. I mean, utilities, the term itself, refers to a market, an industry, a product, or a service in which, by its very nature, there can't be competition. We've sort of grown up in this world with the cable companies because only one or two companies can run wires to an individual's house. So that aspect of it, the physical aspect of it, is still somewhat of a utility. But the service itself, what goes over those wires, what goes through those pipes, that needs to be opened up to competition.
I want to close with a question about LavaBit, which you had to shut down because you didn't want to compromise all of your users' data and just hand it over to the government. We're looking back a few years at that. Are you still glad that you did it? And how did that interaction with the government affect your outlook? And are things better or worse?
So I wouldn't say I'm glad I had to destroy the business that took me 10 years to create. But it's certainly a decision I would make 100 out of 100 times because it went against everything I felt was important about how we interact with companies. It violated that sacred trust between a service provider and the user. It went against the very foundation of why I started LavaBit in the first place, which was to create the type of email service that I would want to use myself. How has that changed me? I find myself becoming more radicalized. I love this country. I have trouble seeing myself living in any other. And I will continue to love this country. But what I despise is the job our government is doing. Because I've come to hate the government we have.
Ladar Levison, thank you very much for talking to us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
For Reason TV, I'm Zach Weissmuller.
And remember, he took down LavaBit to protect the integrity of what he created and the promise he made to the customers that it would be encrypted, that he wouldn't give access to anyone. And government steps in and says, "Give me your encryption key," and he's like, "No, I shut it all down." And that made them very, very mad. Excuse me there. Down the wrong pipe. I have one here from Natural News that sounds a little odd. FDA approved drug turns ordinary people into obedient zombies. Saps all free will, allows people to be programmed by the media or government, sold as transdermal patch. When I lived in Ecuador, I was warned about the pollen from the flower of a beautiful tree. The pollen is called devil's breath, and when a tiny amount of it is blown into the face of an intended victim, it immediately saps the person's free will, turning them into a compliant zombie. Excuse me. A compliant zombie who will do anything they're commanded to do. Empty their bank account, engage in sexual acts, or even donate a kidney. This isn't some urban legend either. The devil's breath pollen is rich in scopolamine, a potent drug that saps free will and turns people into zombies. Scopolamine can wipe the memories of its victims, reports the Daily Mail. Scopolamine can be blown in the face of a passerby on the street, and within minutes that person is under the drug's effect. Scopolamine is odorless and tasteless. You can guide them wherever you want, he explained. It's like they're a child. The drug, he said, turns people into compliant zombies and blocks memories from forming, so even after the drug wears off, victims have no recollection as to what happened. FDA approved drug that literally saps human will and turns people into obedient zombies. If all this sounds exactly like what we are all witnessing in American society today, that because drug companies have turned scopolamine into a FDA-approved I believe we're back now. Lost connection for some reason. It says the scopolamine drug is offered under the name transderm scope and is designed to be placed under right behind the ear, allowing the scopolamine drug to be absorbed into the bloodstream. When the scopolamine chemical enters the bloodstream, it immediately affects the brain, turning a normal human into being an auto-suggestion hypnosis subject who believes and obeys anything they hear. If that person happens to be watching MSNBC while absorbing this drug, they might mindlessly come to believe that they're supposed to vote for Hillary Clinton because she's so smart, honest, and awesome. Combine this drug with the effects of mass polarization and widespread antidepressant drug use, and you get a toxic cocktail of mind-numbing drugs that sap free will and turn humans into walking zombies. The drug turns people into complete zombies and blocks memories performing and And it sounds like exactly what we're seeing today with all people who voted for President Obama in 2008 and 12 elections. They have no recollection what they voted for, and they can't seem to realize that all of Obama's campaign promises were outright lies. They voted out of obedience, not rational thinking. And now, as so many of the very people who voted for Obama find themselves jobless, laid off, or with their work hours cut, they're starting to come to their senses and ask, what have I done? Now, mindless obedience is available as an FDA-approved pharmaceutical. It's a brave new world, after all, and you can't have people have freedom to think, can you? And Vice did a documentary on it. World's Scariest Drug from Vice. So go check it out. And that article was from naturalnews.com. And that was titled FDA approved drug turns ordinary people into obedient zombies. It saps all free will, allows people to be programmed by the media or government, sold as transdermal patch. Okay. Okay. Now, I've talked about inflation and what we're probably going to see in the near future, and we're already seeing the beginnings of it, and it's with the minimum wage increases and what this does to the market and how it creates this bubble, which we're already in a bubble where, according to all these people, our economy's doing good, our dollar's on the rise, and everybody's doing good. Everybody out on the streets going, huh? My hours have been cut, whatnot. So we already have an artificial bubble. Well, this $15 an hour minimum wage hike, while it's only enacted in, I want to say, 19 states now, what this initially is going to do is start creating this bubble where they go, look, these people are now making money and all this. Well, what we forget is, when minimum wage jobs go up to $15 an hour, for the other companies to be able to keep their labor force that's out there, maybe working in a factory, busting their butts, sweating their butts off, go, well, if their pay went up that many dollars per hour, I want my pay to go up that many dollars per hour. I'm not going to be working in these conditions for the same amount of pay as the minimum wage McDonald's worker. I'm not even going to work for close to that. I'll go there and work. Which we'll find out that, one, those jobs will be limited by technology. But now you hit a factor in the economy where it's going to start hitting the shelf, where you see product prices going up if the jobs stay here. not, everybody will be unemployed and still not have any money for the Chinese made stuff. Well, inflation will hit. And we have, again, a bubble already. And I think the bubble's being even inflated more. I think it could hit us harder than the housing bubble. But we'll see. So I want to play this clip, Jonathan Newman, Inflation in the Business Cycles.
Welcome to Mises Weekends. I'm your host, Jeff Deist, and this weekend we continue our series featuring some of the young scholars who are spending their summer here at the Mises Institute as summer fellows. And one of those young scholars is Jonathan Newman, whom we met about a year ago, and he's working on a PhD in econ just across the street from us at Auburn University. And Jonathan is not only a thoroughly Austrian scholar, but he's also an excellent teacher. And he's concerned about his students, he cares about his students, and he cares about being an effective teacher, unlike so many young people who seem to go into academia just to publish. So with that, since I'm traveling this week, we thought you would enjoy hearing Jonathan teach some young high school students on the subject of inflation. I think you'll find his approach is novel, and I think you'll enjoy it very much. So stay tuned for a great talk about inflation.
The word inflation means different things to different people. One popular conception of inflation focuses on prices, all prices actually. For these people, including some economists, inflation means a rise in the general price level. That is, the goods and services we buy become more expensive. The other conception of inflation focuses on the money supply. Economists with this focus think of inflation as an increase in the amount of money in the economy. We'll see that viewing inflation as a rise in prices can be misleading and ambiguous, especially compared to viewing inflation as an increase in the money supply. First of all, prices can rise for many reasons. If the demand for something increases relative to its supply, or if the supply of something decreases relative to the demand for it, the price will increase. And the fundamental reason for this is called diminishing marginal utility. Increasing our stock of some good means that it will go toward the satisfaction of a lower ranked end. If the next marginal unit goes toward a lower ranked end, then the most we are willing to pay for the next unit will be less than the previous unit. You might be willing to pay $600 for one Apple Watch, which came out of the market today, but the most you would be willing to pay for another might be $100, maybe as a gift for somebody, or so that you could wear two on both of your wrists. Think of how cool that would look. Even though this sounds pretty limiting in terms of the reasons prices can rise, these two concepts, supply and demand, can and do channel all sorts of changes in the market. Preferences can change. Goods can go in and out of fashion. Accidents can happen that reduce our supply of a certain good. We can think of new and more efficient ways of producing goods. Services that at one time could only be done with human labor can be replaced or complemented with new tools and machines and so on. The list of things that affect supply and demand is infinite, depending on how specific you get. But the important thing to remember is that all of these sorts of changes are integrated into and channeled through our preferences and ideas, and therefore supply and demand. Secondly, there is really no good way to measure a general rise in the price level. You may be familiar with indexes like the Consumer Price Index, which are calculated and compiled based on survey data and technical mathematical methods. But by their very nature, they cannot appropriately measure the price level. They cannot do so because these sorts of indexes are one number. They try to boil the trillions of pieces of data on the prices of all goods and services in the economy down to just one piece of data. Market prices, which are a complicated phenomenon on their own, fluctuate not only year to year, but month to month, day by day, and even second to second. Also, there is no central repository of price information. Even in one country, prices emerge in a very scattered, decentralized way, from the halls of Washington, D.C. to the dark back alleys of downtown Chicago, from the lots of car dealers with neon paint to hand to pocket tips for bellhops and restaurant servers. From fleeting ones and zeros soaring at light speed across the internet to long-term contracts for land use or film production. One number couldn't even begin to describe the magnitude and dynamic nature of something like the price level. It would be like driving out west for a camping trip and going to the remotest location at night to view the stars and a meteor shower. And then a month later, when you return to civilization and cell service, you text your parents what the view was like and say, it was cool. Price index information is delayed, incomplete, and by its very nature, incapable of describing the astronomical picture of market prices. And we haven't even mentioned the well-cited issues with surveys, government data, and the more specific issues with the particular measurement. A third issue with viewing inflation only as a rise in the price level is that it stops short of explaining the full consequences of monetary inflation. Many people correctly understand the relationship between the price level and the money supply. More money means higher prices. And they also understand that this relationship is bad for the average Joe. Now, Dr. Salerno, whose first name is Joseph, is not average by any measure, but we can say that if he is one of the later receivers of new money, he has to pay higher prices before his own salary increases due to inflation, however you define it. In this way, inflation is not harmless. It represents a wealth transfer to the first users of the new money from the later users of the new money as it ripples through the economy. Even though most people know and understand this consequence of increasing the money supply, it stops short of explaining the full consequences of monetary inflation, which will be developed in the second part of my talk. But to summarize, viewing inflation as a rise in the price level has at least three main problems. It is ambiguous because almost anything can change prices. It is impractical because it can't be appropriately measured. And it is incomplete because it doesn't tell the whole story of increases in the money supply. Inflation is more appropriately viewed as an increase in the money supply, and this conception of inflation does not suffer the same problems as the other. Monetary inflation has a simple, well-defined cause, unlike price inflation. Monetary inflation is measurable because money is its own unit of account and can be counted up, unlike price inflation, which is not directly measurable. Monetary inflation is also the starting point for the business cycle story, instead of the stopping point for many, like price inflation. Before we can discuss the ups and downs of the business cycle, we have to gain an understanding of two connected concepts: the interest rate and production. The interest rate is a price, like any other price, but for present money. It seems weird that you can buy money, but if you just reverse your perspective of any regular transaction, buying money becomes an obvious and ubiquitous part of our day-to-day lives. When you buy an Apple Watch, or two, if you want one on both wrists, you exchange money for the device. From Apple's perspective, though, they are not only selling the watch, but buying your money. The price of your $600 is one Apple Watch. The interest rate is a price for present money in terms of future money. When you take out a loan, you are buying present money in exchange for the promise of a future payment. The relative difference between these two sums is the interest rate. And just like any other good, the lower the price, the more people will want to buy. At lower interest rates, more people are willing to borrow. In modern times, we've outsourced a lot of the lending to banks, which act as financial intermediaries. Banks use our savings to lend to prospective borrowers, and so the supply of loanable present money depends on how much people save. Said another way, it depends on how much people consume, since saving is the opposite of consumption. The indirectness of borrowing and lending through banks does not complicate things too much. In fact, it makes it easier for us to conceive of the supply of loans as being made up of saving. Entrepreneurs are some of the primary borrowers of present money. Entrepreneurs buy factors of production like land, labor, and capital to produce goods and services. They will only engage in production, though, if they expect to profit. That is, if their revenues exceed their costs. If they borrow money to pay for the factors of production, then the profit would also have to exceed the interest they promised to pay for the borrowed funds. For this reason, the interest rate is a vital piece of information for entrepreneurs. If interest rates are high, then only highly profitable lines of production will be undertaken. If interest rates are low, then more lines of production become profitable. In an unhampered market, interest rates are determined by supply and demand. If people become more willing to part with their present money or save, then the supply of loanable funds will increase relative to demand, and the interest rate will fall. At the lower interest rate, more lines of production will become profitable because now entrepreneurs can borrow more cheaply to purchase factors of production. Since this scenario started with people becoming more willing to save, it's also clear that the entrepreneurs will be able to purchase the real resources required for production. Consumers have shown that they are willing to consume less, so now more resources can be used by producers for production. Let's walk through a specific example of how this works. Suppose Tim Cook has an idea for how to produce 1 million Apple Watches and expects revenues from his sales to exceed his cost by about 10%. He doesn't have the money to pay for the machines and the laborers and the factories required to produce the watches, so he needs to borrow. The current interest rate is 15%, unfortunately for Tim Cook, so we just hold on to his idea for the time being. However, a couple months later, due to increased willingness for people to save and invest, the interest rate falls a whopping 10%, down to just 5%. Tim Cook reevaluates his plan and his expectations of profitability and decides to go for it. He borrows the money necessary to pay for laborers, machines, and factories and starts producing Apple Watches. He sells his product and gets revenue that exceeds his cost by 12%, which was a little more than he was expecting. He pays back his creditors the amount he promised, 5%, which left him with 7% all to himself for taking the risk and producing something that consumers like. The lower interest rate in this example encouraged the entrepreneur to produce and also signaled to the entrepreneur that resources have been freed up in the economy for use in production. Now let's see what happens when entrepreneurs get a false signal from credit markets via monetary inflation. When a central bank decides to increase the money supply, the new money enters the economy through the same markets that people borrow and lend. The new money increases the supply of present money available for lending, which, as we all know, will decrease the price, or the interest rate in this case. To be clear, this time the lower interest rate does not reflect people's willingness to save or invest, but only reflects the central banker's intervention. This artificially low interest rate sends all of the same signals to entrepreneurs and lenders that a normal interest rate does, but it is not based on people's real preferences. When the central bank increases the money supply and interest rates fall, it induces more borrowing and less saving. Entrepreneurs are more than happy to take out the loans at the lower interest rate, but everybody else is less willing to save at the lower interest rate. The newly printed money makes up the difference. Less saving means more consumption, and since the interest rate is so low, they may even borrow to finance even more consumption. Entrepreneurs take their funds and purchase factors of production, and at the new lower interest rate, the lines of production they undertake are the ones that weren't as profitable before. Everybody is happy as they consume, invest, earn higher wages, start new projects, and enjoy the ride to the top. The high cannot last forever, though. Even though spending is climbing on all fronts, no new resources have been created, just new green slips of paper. The economy has not allocated real resources away from consumption and towards production. It has just stretched the existing resources thin. The signals entrepreneurs rely on were falsified and based on the whims of a few powerful people, not the collective voluntary interactions of individuals everywhere. The boom peaks and falls into a bust when some combination of these events unfolds. 1, when the increasingly scarce factors of production become too expensive. 2, when the monetary spigot gets turned off and so consumption and investment run dry. And 3, when people start to realize the damage that has been done. The bust is characterized by under and unemployment, falling prices, and a readjustment of capital through the economy. The bust is painful, but necessary and healthy. Capital and laborers have been misallocated, funds malinvested, and lines of production that appeared to be profitable are revealed to be unprofitable in hindsight. The correction happens during the bust. In fact, the bust is the correction. Resources need to go where they are most highly valued, and the only system capable of such a daunting and huge task is the unhampered market economy. In the past and up to today, the necessary correction hasn't been allowed to run its course before central banks reinflate and restart the cycle. So it's unfortunate that we have to call the boom-bust cycle instead of the boom-bust event. If it were a one-time thing, we might forgive the ones responsible and say, okay, that was an interesting experiment. We didn't really think it was going to work, but now everybody knows. Sort of like the George Clooney and Arnold Schwarzenegger Batman movie. Just as the term business cycle suggests, the artificial booms and the painful busts continue because some people, especially the government and those connected, stand to benefit at the expense of others, and because of a general lack of understanding of even the fundamental mechanisms at work. It's so dreary, so let me try to end on a positive note. We can avoid the mess. People are getting into and developing currencies that are not tied to our fractional reserve and central banking system. Newer technologies are being adopted for loans to be processed at rates less affected by central bank manipulation. Many people are realizing the disastrous record of central banking and expansionary monetary policy. The same people are learning the way to real economic growth via real savings and economically sustainable uses of our resources. Maybe one day we'll look back at the wrecking ball swings of our current economy the same way we look at the Batman and Robin starring George Clooney and Arnold Schwarzenegger, laughing but cringing and shaking our heads.
Mises.org, Mises Media on YouTube. Check them out, subscribe, and support. Now, a lot of this isn't even taught in most universities. I'll Austrian economics is not taught. Real free market is not taught. And when you do have so-called free market being taught, it's taught to hate capitalism, hate free market, and their example of capitalism is crony corporatism, or crony capitalism, corporatism, and it's given misrepresentation. Mises University does a good job on educating people on what a free market actually is. And it's one of those things, you know, you don't look at the ability for most people anymore. Lower middle class, above poverty level, you don't ever think about, well, I'll just save up some money and buy a brand spanking new car. You don't go, I'll go to work 5 days a week, 8 to 10 hours a day in a hot, sweaty environment and expect to, I'll save in 5-10 years, somewhere in between there, I should have enough money to pay cash for a house. And we look back, generations back, and there was opportunity where you didn't look at taking a loan out for 30 years to pay for a home, 15 years for a car, 10 years for a car, even 5 years for a car. You drove a piece of junk for 2 years and bought you a brand spanking new car. Where we are is so far away, and the thing is it's not that long ago once you realize how fast life passes you by. And to realize that even though it might have been generations ago, that wasn't that far along. And you look at how fast our way of life has changed here in America, away from being able to live free, be who you are, having that property, we're going to go a different direction. And it's, people are like, well, we're getting more acceptable of gay and yeah, but you're also getting less acceptable of white heterosexuals. So, and a lot of people will even touch on that subject. And it's the truth. Not everywhere, not everybody, but there's definitely a manipulation going on where they're pushing that. And you do get those extreme groups on, the left or on a certain race or gender or non-gender or sexuality going after heterosexuals or whites. And it doesn't properly get covered in the media. Capitalism is freedom.com. Watch blonde anchor destroy Obama live TV. A conservative anchor's blistering monologue aimed at President Barack Obama went viral over the weekend, amassing more than 1.3 million views since it's posted online Friday night. One American news host, Tommy Lauren, 22, zeroed in on Obama in the wake of last week's attack on military personnel in Chattanooga. blasting the president for what she called a half-baked policy at fighting the Islamic State terror group. This won't take long, but it's important, she said in a monologue. Let's see if I got a second. Yeah, let me get to. I'll play just part of this real quick before the end of the broadcast.
Welcome back for some quick final thoughts tonight. Now, this won't take long, but it's important. 4 United States Marines are now dead. Climate change didn't kill them. Lack of free community college didn't kill them. The income gap, wage inequality, nope, not those things either. Gay marriage, nope. Oh, white racism, not that either. So what did? President Obama, if you won't say it, I will. Radical Islam. This is not workplace violence. This is not a criminal act with motives unknown. This is terrorism. The suspected shooter, Mohammed Abdulaziz, a devout Muslim. Do I care that he seemed like an all-American young man? Do I care that he was good at mixed martial arts or a smart, quiet guy? Do I care that his high school friends wouldn't classify him as overly religious? No, I don't give a flying you-know-what about any of that. Was he linked to ISIS or Al-Qaeda or Hamas or any of the other 15-plus offshoot terrorist groups? Does it matter? I'm sorry, but radical Islam is becoming the rule, not the exception. Yesterday's moderate is today's terrorist. I care that this SOB killed 4 of our United States Marines, and I care that our commander-in-chief is more concerned with Muslim sensitivity than the honor and sacrifice made by these Marines. Now, this is the 21st time our military men and women have been attacked here at home. This is not a Middle East problem. This is an American problem, and I'm sorry, but I can't sit here and let this go. Not anymore. I come from a family of Marines. My grandpa was a World War II paratrooper. My uncle, a Vietnam Purple Heart recipient. My cousins, both Marine Corps officers. I have some very close Navy SEAL connections as well. In fact, someone very close to my heart is deployed to the Middle East right now. But the sad thing is, I was telling him last night, I think you're safer over there than you would be right here in the United States of America. I've had it with this failed strategy, this halfway, half-baked, tiptoe, be friendly to jihadis mentality pushed by this administration. Be a leader, someone. They, the radical Islamists, have brought the fight right here to the red, white, and blue, and it's about time we bring it to them, full force. Let's show them what the United States of America looks like up close and personal. Show them what a B-1 bomber looks like flying overhead. Show them what they're messing with.
Now, this has gotten a lot of praise, and I've even seen liberty activists do it. And the problem is they have seen the bombers. They have seen the troops. They've had their doors kicked in. They've had their men taken away and tortured for information that they knew nothing about. And that has helped fuel ISIS, ISIL, whatever you want to call it. It's helped fuel hatred. It's also helped fuel hatred in America. And you are going to have crazy people that act out in extremely bad ways. But you have people doing that over a lot of issues. There are people out there that'll shoot someone over road rage. And our government fighting them is not going to do anything. They might give you the illusion that it will, but you're talking about an ideology that is worldwide now, that has no race, as Christianity has no race. Multiple races, multiple places throughout the world practice it. Same with, Muslims. What you have to do is learn how to be self-responsible. These places weren't armed. And I know Scott Walker, I guess, has signed something to arm people at the recruiting and military bases. Here in Indiana, Pence has already done it. Something he did pretty quick after that by doing an executive order, which I still disagree with executive order, but because I think people are fine with others being able to protect themselves, definitely here in Indiana. But the problem is you can't stop the crazies. You're not going to be able to prevent the crazies without taking everybody's freedom away and turning you into obedient slaves. Basically, if they turn everybody into a criminal and basically do that, they'll still tell you have the illusion of safety. But what happens in prison systems? Again, it's a structure of corruption. Absolute power gives, corrupts absolutely, and it gives these people these egos, and it's been proven and proven even in experiments. So, it's nothing new, and that's the veil that we're trying to break through. We're trying to show people that government is never going to be the answer. It is part of the problem. The idea of groups of people being able to rule over others is the issue. It's not cooperating with each other, it's ruling over. If you believe in a forced union between states, between communities within those states, a forced union, forced union between neighbors. Neighbors don't have a right to abridge the other person, but they don't have a right not to be offended by that person. You might not like your neighbor, might not like how they live. And that's okay. You can dislike it, but you don't have a right to abridge them. Nor do they have the right to abridge your rights. It's the ability to live differently that gives you freedom. When that's a mutual understanding, it makes it easier for people that might not even like each other to at least stand up for each other. I think my connection cut out there for a second. Okay, we're coming to the end of the broadcast. I thought I had one last one. Now, what I want to talk about when it comes to the whole, one side and the indifferences coming to other. Well, if you have a right to be transgender, you have a right to your own beliefs and your thoughts. And people don't have the right to abridge your person and your freedom, then don't do it to others. Liberal tolerance. Transgender threatens to put conservative pundit in hospital. I seen this last weekend. My buddy was showing it to me. Transgender reporter Zoe Turd threatened to hospitalize conservative pundit Ben Shapiro during a Dr. Drew debate in which Shapiro dared to utter the hate crime of arguing that wearing a dress didn't make her a biological female. Why does the left get away with demonizing their political adversaries as hateful, intolerant, and violent?